The US-Mexico border has seen its fair share of conflicts, but as of 2024, it's worse than ever. From cartel wars to people smuggling and an all-out war between state and federal troops in the US, things escalated to a point of no return. After footage of little children crying as they try to walk through barbed wire emerged early this year, the situation became clear to everyone. Illegal immigration and people smuggling are real problems that plague the border and cost lives every single day. And as the US is divided on how to handle this problem, Mexican cartels are using the chaos to their advantage. Let's unpack the US-Mexico border situation today and explore this in the wider context of Mexican drug cartels.
Oh, you learned on TikTok.
It's no secret that many people in Mexico would like to move to the United States and pursue a better, safer life. And yeah, with social media, it's easier than ever to learn about secret passageways that can take you across the border if you can't get a green card. To become a lawful citizen in the US as a Mexican national, or any national really, you must find employment, visa sponsorship through family or higher education, or marry a US citizen. Generally, you also must be over 18, have no criminal record, and be fluent in English. But not all people in Mexico can afford these luxuries. And I say luxuries because some people are fleeing for their lives.
The Jalisco New Generation cartel took the fight to the next level, shooting down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade.
Many parts of Mexico are in a 24/7 state of war, thanks to cartels fighting for ever bigger territory and control over smuggling routes. In Mexico, there are children who see unspeakable horrors on their way to school. And the news is constantly ridden with grisly facts. People live in constant anxiety about learning they lost their loved one in another cartel attack.
Here's a very small sample. Most of it is simply too grisly to show. There was the summary beheading of 200 migrants. The casino fire which killed at least 50.
Mass graves, dead bodies hung from bridges, decapitated heads left out on the street have all become increasingly normalized.
Yeah, this is not something that should be normalized anywhere and for anyone. And some families had to flee their towns after they were reduced to ashes in the cartel wars. In 2014, the Los Zetas cartel found out that 2 men from the city of Allende had reportedly stolen money from the cartel. So, a huge army stormed Allende. But they weren't out for these 2 men. Los Zetas had decided to punish the whole town for it. Somewhere between 300 and 500 people died. Imagine having a kill count so big you can't even estimate a real number. 80 homes were destroyed with heavy military machinery. Allende was reduced to nothing, and whoever managed to flee became a shadow of the person they once were.
Y les digo a mis hijos, levántense, les digo, porque quién sabe qué está pasando en la calle. Digo, vístanse y nos salimos. Y todo empezó a tronar, ya no había luz, todo empezó a tronar, tanques, camionetas. Pero sí, ahí perdí a mis niños y a mi hija.
With this in mind, it's easy to see why 12,000 illegal immigrants enter the US every single day. But this doesn't come without struggle, conflict, and even death.
What we're hearing over there, according to our Border Patrol experts, those are cartel members who are actually shouting. So they're getting ready to smuggle some more folks across.
With more people flooding the US border from the Mexican side, the Republican Texas governor, Greg Abbott, made a tough decision. In 2021, he launched an Operation Lone Star. It was a joint operation between the Texas Department of Public Safety and the state's military department.
We began Operation Lone Star to do the job that Washington would not do. Within weeks of taking office, President Biden turned our southern border into a porous mess, where illegal immigrants wandered across the Rio Grande without anyone there to interdict them.
Indeed, Abbott made this about the Democratic president too, disagreeing with methods he called too weak or ineffective. Operation Lone Star was aimed at curbing illegal immigration, as well as human smuggling and the narcotics trade. Of course, most Mexican cartels smuggle their substances into the US via the border, and Governor Abbott knew the troops had to tighten their defenses if they were to stop this from happening. Between 2020 and 2021, immigrant arrests rose by 278%. That's huge. But while Abbott spoke of nothing but success, news outlets and people pointed otherwise. Immigrants were being denied water and even pushed back into dangerous rivers, some of them drowning in the process. This was bad enough for many to doubt this operation. Among other things, it further divided the country, with Democrats accusing Republicans of inhumane methods, while Republicans accused the Democratic government of not doing enough to control the border situation. Abbott even went as far as saying,
Biden does not care about either Texas or the border and what's going on.
It got even worse when the operation triggered a huge migrant crisis in several sanctuary cities in the U.S. Thousands of migrants were taken to cities outside Texas and given temporary homes.
Within less than 2 years, more than 37,000 were sent to New York City, more than 30,000 to Chicago, Denver, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Los Angeles, all received thousands.
Needless to say, resources quickly became scarce, and Democratic cities already short on money paid for the immigrants' bus tickets to other cities. This sparked an even more complicated debate.
This is a political stunt by Governor Abbott. He's unfortunately using human beings as political pawns.
But Greg Abbott did not seem to care about these accusations. He even ordered Texas troops to block federal troops from walking the southern Texas border, and doubled down when President Joe Biden threatened with legal consequences. Abbott ended up signing a bill that made illegal immigration a state crime. He also built walls and barriers in the Rio Grande and fortified everything with barbed wire. Meanwhile, disturbing reports emerged that the Texas National Guard troops were living in hellish conditions. Some of them had severe pay delays and inhumane living conditions. Others had taken their own lives. It was safe to assume the situation was dire, and the military was not being treated well. However, when President Biden ordered the Texas troops to stand down and give way to the federal troops, Governor Abbott had this to say:
"The president does not need new laws. The president needs a backbone."
If this didn't sound like an insult already, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas explained why Abbott is wrong.
And as a matter of fact, former President Trump tried to close the border, and it was enjoined in the courts and never saw the light of day. This coming from an individual who is purposefully refusing to coordinate, communicate, collaborate with other officials, and trying to wreak havoc in other cities and states across the country. That is not a model of governance, and he couldn't be more wrong.
Over 100 miles of razor wire fence were installed along the border. By the end of 2023, worrying videos emerged of immigrants still making their way across the border, some carrying their children through the deadly razor wire fences.
It's not normal. It's not humane for anyone to cross a river, including children. It really shows how the federal government is attacking Texas for trying to prevent that, because what they want to do, they want to keep the border open.
Some 700,000 protesters came to the border to express their concerns. Most of them applauded Abbott and criticized the government, saying they are not feeling safe anymore.
This is just absolutely ridiculous. We got fentanyl killing people all over the place. I don't trust mass media. I don't trust social media.
Many protesters seem to confuse people who seek a better life with narcotic smugglers.
They're letting fentanyl across the border. They're letting cocaine across the border.
Did you let any fentanyl across?
Did you stop anybody?
Indeed, if immigration isn't properly controlled, it's easier for drugs to make their way through. But out of the million families trying to come into the States, only a minute fraction is people with bad intent and narcotics on hand. What's more, people who have lived in southern Texas before Operation Lone Star said immigration had always been normal, and no one is invading Texas like some newspapers expressed themselves.
Why do people suddenly care about it when this has been going on for years?
I think the big fear is it's coming to their neighborhood next.
I mean, if they really have cared, they would have stopped it since 2019.
I've lived here, my generation, my dad's generation, my grandpa's generation. Immigration is normal. I mean, you get ups and downs.
Sure.
And that's life.
Others came to the border to see how dire the situation was, only to find there were no dangerous scenarios or anything that they had read online.
Mainstream media does a real terrible job of giving out truthful information, so we thought might as well see it with our own eyes, find out what's going on, and kind of go from there.
What have you seen?
Nothing.
In short, it's all politics, and Operation Lone Star only adds more fuel to the fire. Instead of solving an actual situation, it's creating one. As President Biden refused to condone the Texan methods, Governor Abbott asked other states to send their troops to their aid. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee was the first to respond.
Today, Governor Bill Lee authorized the deployment of Tennessee National Guard troops to the country's southern border. 100 troops will deploy later this month. It's a response to a request from Texas Governor Greg Abbott.
Governor Lee said,
"The federal government owes Americans a plan to secure our country, and in the meantime, meantime, states continue to answer this important call to service. I am again authorizing the Tennessee National Guard to help secure the southern border, and I commend these troops for providing critical support.
Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders followed.
Dozens of Arkansas National Guardsmen are making their way to the U.S.-Mexico border.
Now they'll spend the next month helping the Texas National Guard in controlling immigration.
Sanders also criticized the government for not doing enough to curb trafficking and smuggling.
President Biden's failure at our southern border puts the entire country at risk. States must now step up where the president has failed to repel illegals, fight the cartels, and stop human and drug trafficking.
Then, Governor Abbott made another bold move.
Texas is blocking federal agents from processing migrants in a public area of Eagle Pass, just a mile away from the U.S.-Mexico border. The move is the latest escalation between the state and federal government over the nation's immigration policy.
On January 11th, 2024, Abbott signed an emergency declaration to close Shelby Park, a huge green space in Eagle Pass. This meant that Texas troops flooded the park and kicked federal troops out. This sparked a huge debate, only intensifying the already worsening divide. It was also a clear message from Abbott. Texas was taking immigration matters into its own hands, irrespective of the president's thoughts. It wasn't long before a tragic piece of news reached the screens across the world. 3 Mexican migrants were found drowned, a 33-year-old mother and her 2 children, aged 8 and 10.
We are learning 3 migrants have died near Shelby Park in Eagle Pass. The Department of Homeland Security confirming just over an hour ago, a woman and 2 children drowned in the Rio Grande River near the park.
The U.S. Border Patrol claimed they alerted the Texas National Guard about the family. They were asking for help and were clearly drowning. And yet, the Texas troops did nothing. A team of lawyers was quick to appear and respond that the Texas National Guard was in fact only notified when their bodies had been pulled out of the water. There was nothing they could do. But the fact that this information came from lawyers and conflicted with the Federal Border Patrol claims did not sit right with some people. On January 22nd, there was a small victory on the government's part as they obtained the right to cut some of the razor wire that made its way into the rivers, unaliving immigrants.
The Supreme Court ruling in favor of removing sharp razor wire installed by Texas and rivers along the border between U.S. and Mexico. A 5-4 vote now clears the way for federal agents to actually cut down the wire, which administration officials have called dangerous and inhumane.
2 days later, Abbott stated that he wasn't worried about this new law. He would just have his troops block the federal troops' path and not allow them to cut the wire. It was a direct challenge to federal authorities and, in a way, a call to war. As Abbott called the border situation a crisis and an invasion, many states sided with him in this standoff.
Well, more than 20 Republican governors now supporting Texas as Governor Abbott declares the border crisis an invasion and invokes the state's constitutional right to self-defense.
Meanwhile, the Mexican cartels are using this escalation to their advantage. When 2 parties are fighting, it's easier for a third one to come in and swoop the prize. Over the last 2 decades, it has gotten harder and harder for cartels to move their substances and people over the border. Stricter laws and tougher punishments are meant to discourage people from joining cartels in the first place and to reduce the quantity of narcotics making their way into the U.S. By far, one of the biggest blows to the Mexican cartel's profits has been the tightening of the U.S.-Mexico border. The greatest chunk of their income comes from trafficking. So, if they can't take their substances into the U.S. anymore, who will buy enough to make up the difference? What's more, cartels are also losing more and more employees as the arrests around the border have increased greatly over the last decade. So Mexican cartels have learned to adapt to the new situation. That is, they now make a big profit from smuggling people across the Mexico-U.S. border.
This massive influx of migrants has left large swaths of the border in Eagle Pass unpatrolled, literally unpatrolled.
I'm still wondering where the border is nowadays, to be honest. I mean, people say the border's on the verge of collapse. What border? When people are just free to come across, ask for asylum and get released, where is your border?
There will always be a fight between those trying to help the poor families seeking a better life and those trying to send them back to Mexico, fearing the increasing number of immigrants. From the migrants' point of view, the situation is pretty desperate. Most of them had to spend their entire life savings and even took out loans from, you guessed, Mexican cartels. Cartels charge an average Mexican national $10,000 for what they call a safe smuggle into the U.S. But here's the catch. On the one hand, it's rarely safe. Many immigrants drown. Others get hurt, severely dehydrated, and reach the U.S. inches away from death, with no access to food or clean water. Then there's the loan. If the immigrant can't afford to pay up, they will take a loan. By that, the cartel has them in their possession for the rest of their life. They will be forced to work for the cartel once in the States, putting themselves or their children in harm's way.
They know that when they come through Mexico from different parts of the world, they're going to have to go in contact with the drug cartels. They're going to have to get in contact with the smugglers. So they're the ones that are going to control what's coming across, what's not.
That's right. Not even all migrants are Mexican. Some come from Central and South America, and they have to pass through Mexico to get to the U.S.
Most of the migrants are fleeing corruption or violence in Central and South America.
Mexican cartels are quick to seize the opportunity and offer them deals and loans where only they profit. Some women will be forced into horrific illegal work that only makes the cartel money, and they don't even count that toward their $10,000 loan. It's never a good deal with a cartel. They win, and the migrants suffer. Other migrants are kept for days or even weeks in small containers or houses filled with dozen others as they wait for their promised safe passage. Meanwhile, they succumb to horrible illnesses which are always quick to spread in stuffed places like these. Again, the cartels have already made their money, so they don't care who lives and who dies. According to National Border Patrol Council Vice President Art Del Cueto, that's the main problem at the U.S.-Mexico border. Not that there are thousands of immigrants trying to get through every day, but that it's once again cartels controlling the entire situation.
So at the end, that's what it comes down to. The drug cartels, they're the ones that control that southern border. They're the ones that control what comes in and what doesn't come in. So what's in it for them? They realize that if they can control where their group crosses, they're able to distract the agents, they're able to bring in more drugs across, which is one of their ultimate goals.
And while Texas is fighting the U.S. government on the situation, it's even easier for cartels to think of ways to distract the troops. And what better way of distracting the troops than sending more immigrants over the border to cause chaos?
And that is our immigration policy right now in this country, a simple catch and release. We know modern day illegal immigration, modern day crime, it uses and relies on social media and online communication, whether it's WhatsApp or TikTok.
Reportedly, cartels have even infiltrated apps and channels where they direct Mexican nationals towards certain smuggling schemes, all for their profit. According to Art Del Cueto, the only way to control the situation at the border is to target the cartels directly.
Something needs to be done. They need to crack down on the actual cartels. They need to bring back policies that worked under the last administration, like the Remain in Mexico. And you have to detain individuals that do come across asking for asylum.
2024 is an election year, and the escalating situation at the U.S.-Mexico border has been used to score political points both ways. On the one hand, Republicans are talking about narcotics and bad people invading the U.S. On the other hand, Democrats are talking about a humanitarian crisis.
The drowning of 3 migrants, a woman and 2 children, escalating tensions between the White House and the state of Texas.
Many people point out that the vast majority of Mexican immigrants are poor, desperate people looking for a better, safer life. Most of them have children and young relatives, and they hold up hope for their future.
The situations are so risky and so complicated for them that they can no longer wait. And sometimes they decide to risk it all.
For sure, they shouldn't be allowed to drown or die trapped in razor wire. But as Texas shares around half of the U.S. border with Mexico, it's easy to see why they're fighting the hardest to keep illegal migrants from passing. There are 3,000 kilometers of border, or around 2,000 miles.
Texas has been left alone as some frontier outpost for us to have to grapple with ourselves the record-breaking volume of millions of people coming across the border a year. Jake, if this is not an invasion, what is?
It's difficult to see an end to a situation that can be seen from so many angles. Whether it's an invasion crisis or a humanitarian crisis, the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border is affecting a lot of people. But millions of people in Mexico, Central America, and even as far as China see no other choice but to flee their home countries. And if that's the only way they can do it, they will risk their lives.
All of these people who've been waiting many years, fleeing for their lives, they're just wanting to find a better life.
Many people lose hope that they can prosper and they can access a better life in their own countries. And if you combine that with some corruption in some countries, with some lack of freedoms and liberties and the repression, that creates the perfect combination for people then decide to leave.
Over the last decade, over 9,000 missing immigrants have been documented by a website only in Central America. This is just to get a grasp of how dangerous the passing is, but also of how many people will choose this path knowing its dangers. Immigration will only stop when all countries are safe for their inhabitants, and drug cartels will only stop when there is no more profit to be made from smuggling, narcotics, or people. So yeah, it sounds like neither will be stopping anytime soon. So how can the US government control the situation? What is the right path to take in order to keep US citizens safe, but also help others in need?
2 National Guard members and a Border Patrol agent dead after a helicopter crash near Rio Grande City at the US-Mexico border.
These officers lost their lives in the line of duty while trying to keep the US-Mexico border safe, and their deaths further highlight the unexpected increase in crisis along the US-Mexico border that calls for serious concern.
The fastest growing transnational criminal organization known as the Tren de Aragua is a Venezuelan gang that has now infiltrated its way into the United States through various sectors of the US-Mexico border.
Criminal gangs have leveraged this chaotic situation to infiltrate the different American cities through the US-Mexico border since the end of Title 42.
What we do have on the US side of the border are kidnappings, corruption issues, and the illegal drug trade that goes through, the cash that's flowing south, the weapons that are flowing south, and the drugs that are flowing north.
These gangs, when they enter the country, are responsible for most of the recent crimes that have been ravaging the cities of America. These crimes include gun battles in the public, assault on law enforcement officers, shoplifting, armed robbery, kidnapping, and even murder.
An illegal immigrant allegedly killed the 22-year-old nursing student as she jogged near the University of Georgia campus.
What's more disturbing is that from the look of things, it seems like these guys will be around for a while. After the lifting of Title 42 policy by Joe Biden, illegal immigration is now mischaracterized as a harmless offense, and its severity is minimized as the Biden administration claims that the majority of offenses are non-violent in nature. This simplistic approach shows a callousness towards the victims of crimes perpetrated by some unlawfully present foreign nationals and ignores the real threat posed by criminal illegal immigrants.
Nearly 180,000 illegal immigrants with criminal records ordered deported from our country are tonight roaming free to threaten peaceful citizens.
The infiltration of various gangs, especially the Venezuelan Tren de Aragua, has become a major concern to United States citizens. The Tren de Aragua is one of South America's most notorious gangs. It originated in Venezuela, where their leader, Nino Guerrero, was incapacitated in the Tocaron prison. This Tocaron prison, instead of actually becoming a prison, served as a base of operations for this gang. Tren de Aragua is known for committing heinous crimes such as narco-trafficking, human trafficking, kidnappings, illegal mining, and money laundering. They have a vast network of operations in countries all over South America. In September 2023, Venezuelan authorities raided the Tocaron prison and were shocked to find out that the prison was a community of its own. They found out that the gang members had created a little city for themselves within the prison walls. They have a play area, a restaurant, a baseball field, a supermarket, and even a mini zoo. They even have wives and kids inside the walls. The gangs ran this particular prison, and they called the shots. They also carry out illegal operations from around the world from that prison. After the raid on the Venezuelan prison by about 11,000 soldiers, a lot of the prisoners escaped arrest. Unfortunately, many of these escaped prisoners, who are members of the notorious De Aragua gang, would later cross the border and make their way into the United States.
Border Patrol has apprehended 41 Tren de Aragua gang members. Law enforcement says they are infiltrating cities in the United States.
The presence of Tren de Aragua has caused a spike in crimes around the United States, most especially in New York.
Recent months, a wave of migrant crime has washed over our city.
I don't see an ending to this. This issue will destroy New York City.
On January 27th, 2 police officers in New York City were involved in an altercation with migrants. The officers had intervened in a crowded and chaotic situation, and the subsequent confrontation was captured on body camera footage. The footage revealed the intensity of the altercation. Authorities initially apprehended 6 suspects. However, 4 of them were suspiciously freed without bail and are suspected to have fled the area. But in late February, 2 of the migrants were arrested again. This time, it was revealed that they were involved with the Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua. One of the suspects, Darwin Gomez Izquiel, was apprehended again for shoplifting with 2 other migrants. He was subsequently arrested by the authorities at a Bronx apartment and sentenced to Rikers prison.
19-year-old Darwin Andres Gomez Izquiel was back in front of a judge overnight, this time in Queens Criminal Court, accused of being the lookout for a group of shoplifters at the Macy's in Queens Center Mall.
What's more disturbing is the fact that most of the illegal immigrants committing these crimes are teenagers. On February 9th, a 15-year-old male from Venezuela fired a gun in Times Square, injuring a tourist and aiming his weapon at police officers before being arrested. The suspect was later identified as an undocumented immigrant who entered the city in September 2023. Jesus Alejandro Rivas Figueroa was apprehended for shoplifting from a sporting store in Times Square. He was accompanied by 2 other suspects, and a security guard witnessed and reported the incident. When the loss prevention officer spotted 2 boys carrying a suspicious bag stuffed with clothing and sneakers, he requested a receipt. Unable to produce one, he seized the bag and attempted to gather further information from the boys. Suddenly, Rivas Figueroa brandished a .45 caliber handgun and opened fire. Fortunately, the officer escaped harm, but a bystander, a 37-year-old Brazilian tourist waiting to purchase sneakers, was struck in the knee. Panic ensued within the store as people fled and sought cover. After evading the authorities on 6th Avenue, he endangered lives by firing more bullets at the pursuing officer. The authorities pursued the fugitive relentlessly, allocating significant resources to apprehend him. A citywide search was launched following his escape at the subway station, and a hefty reward of $10,000 was promised to those providing crucial information that could lead to his capture. Unfortunately, this is not Rivas Figueroa's first offense in New York City. These are only a few of many crimes carried out on a daily basis by these illegal immigrants, but the next one will send you reeling. On Thursday, February 27, 2024, the body of a young woman, 22-year-old Laken Riley, was found in a wooded area on the University of Georgia campus in Athens, Georgia.
Absolutely horrific, and there is no other way, sadly enough, to describe the new details we're getting tonight about Laken Riley's final moments.
As you would have imagined, this shocking discovery sent cold shivers down the spines of residents of the Clark County community. Following some preliminary investigations, some pieces of evidence led to the arrest of a 26-year-old illegal immigrant by the name of Mr. Ibarra.
An illegal immigrant allegedly killed the 22-year-old nursing student as she jogged near the University of Georgia campus.
His apartment is just 1 mile away from where Riley's body was found. It's shocking to know that Mr. Ibarra has no connections whatsoever to Laken Riley.
Neighbors of the suspect, Jose Ibarra, say he stalked her on a near daily basis, watching her as she ran by his apartment day after day.
It is believed the increased number of migrants entering the United States through the U.S.-Mexico border is linked to a rise in crime rates. Now the question is, should the U.S.-Mexico border be closed permanently and asylum seekers turn back? Or should there be stricter measures put in place to separate criminals from genuine asylum seekers?
Images showing a massive line in the river and on U.S. soil as thousands crossed illegally in a span of roughly 2 hours, non-stop.
Due to the surge of hundreds of thousands of migrants, Texas Governor Greg Abbott initiated Operation Lone Star in March 2021 due to a perceived pressing demand for increased law enforcement officers in the U.S.-Mexico border. This operation aims to safeguard the border between the United States and Mexico and halt unlawful border crossings, the smuggling of people and drugs, and other illegal activities. To accomplish this, state and local law enforcement officers, as well as the Texas National Guard, were stationed along the border. Since its inception, the operation has caused controversies. Critics argue that it unfairly targets immigrants and violates their rights. However, Governor Abbott believes the operation is necessary to protect Texans and maintain the state's authority.
We're not imposing a Texas border policy. Texas very simply is enforcing the laws that are the policy of the United States Congress.
Governor Abbott holds the Biden administration responsible for the chaotic situation at the U.S.-Mexico border. He claims that President Biden's immigration policies have sparked widespread debate and have had a detrimental effect on border security, leading to the increased challenge of managing illegal immigrants.
Because the Biden administration has been promoting and allowing open border policies, it has been the state of Texas that had to step up.
Operation Lone Star is a massive border security initiative that is expected to incur expenses exceeding $10 billion by the end of 2024. This unprecedented expenditure is the highest in the security project history of any state in the United States. This fund is being utilized to station a substantial force of National Guard and state law enforcement personnel along the border. Additionally, funds are allocated for the construction of new border obstacles and the implementation of numerous other border protection initiatives. As part of the Online Security Initiative, an innovative barrier called an anti-climb fence has been built. This specialized fence is intended to deter individuals from attempting to climb or cross it. It is equipped with barbed concertina wire to prevent unauthorized border crossings. The border barriers extended beyond physical structures to become psychological deterrents. Their purpose is to instill fear and apprehension, discouraging individuals from attempting illegal border crossings. As of November 2022, about 6,000 National Guard members are actively involved in Operation Lone Star, which has deployed approximately 10,000 in total. Operation Lone Star has resulted in apprehensions of over 450,000 migrants, arrests of over 14,000 criminals, seizure of over 9,000 firearms, over 454 million lethal doses of fentanyl, and over 1,500 pounds of methamphetamine. However, the tension between Governor Abbott and the federal government intensified following his seizure of Shelby Park. Situated in Eagle Pass, Texas, Shelby Park encompasses 47 acres along the Rio Grande River. The park offers amenities such as walking trails, sports fields, and a public dock for accessing the Rio Grande, which serves as the border between the United States and Mexico. Shelby Park also serves as a temporary shelter for migrants. Governor Abbott maintains that the federal government needs to pay more attention to border security, necessitating state intervention to supplement their effort. He had to step in and fill the gap.
I fully expect the Biden administration to stop playing word games and step up and do their job. Immigration is a federal government responsibility. Biden's deliberate inaction has left Texas to fend for itself.
The American Civil Liberties Union filed a legal case representing migrants detained at the park. They claimed that the detention center's circumstances were inhumane and the migrants were being held unlawfully without due process of law. The court accused Governor Abbott of his inhumane treatment of immigrants, citing that his actions disrupted order, jeopardized national security, and impeded the work of officials. Consequently, the Supreme Court directed the Biden administration to remove the razor wire installed along the border.
Texas officials say they will not comply with a deadline tonight to allow Border Patrol access to Shelby Park in Eagle Pass. And Border Patrol agents say for now there are no plans to remove razor wire.
Following the Supreme Court's decision to cut concertina wires around the border, former President Donald Trump urged Republican members of the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives to oppose a bipartisan immigration reform bill.
Toughest set of reforms to secure the border ever. Now, all indications are this bill won't even move forward to the Senate floor. Why? A simple reason. Donald Trump.
That move by President Trump led all Republican governors, except for Vermont's Governor Phil Scott, to express support for Governor Abbott's firm position against President Biden's actions regarding immigration laws in the United States. They supported Abbott's decision to implement contentious border security measures, including concertina wire barriers and floating marine buoys, to strengthen border security. However, while many Republicans supported Trump's strategy, notable figures like Senator Mitch McConnell and Senator Mitt Romney voiced their opposition. They emphasized the importance of bipartisan immigration reform and expressed concern that using it as a campaign issue would hinder potential progress. They believed that addressing immigration through collaboration was crucial to achieving meaningful change. They believe that Trump's actions have exposed the true intentions of Republicans. They are not genuinely committed to reforming the immigration system. Instead, they manipulate the issue for political gain to secure the presidency.
Donald Trump thinks it's bad for him politically. Therefore, he doesn't, even though it helps the country, he's not for it. He'd rather weaponize this issue than actually solve it.
In May 2023, Governor Abbott and the state acquired authority over Shelby Park. Eagle Pass Mayor Rolando Salinas Jr. had authorized this by unilaterally signing a trespass affidavit. This affidavit permitted the Department of Public Safety and the Texas National Guard to apprehend and detain undocumented immigrants in the park, as it was deemed private property. Despite initial public disapproval, resulting in the Eagle Pass City Council rescinding the affidavit, it was reinstated in September September 2023. In response to the gravity of the situation at the border, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security wrote to Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton on January 25th. The letter asked Texas to grant full permission for U.S. Border Patrol agents to enter Shelby Park before the 26th. He stated that if he doesn't follow the instructions, the matter will be reported to the U.S. Department of Justice. Yet, Governor Abbott is defiant. His efforts were undermined by his opposite factions and attracted criticism. In May 2017, Governor Greg Abbott passed Senate Bill 4, a law that aimed to combat illegal immigration in Texas. The law granted local law enforcement the authority to inquire about a person's immigration status during regular interactions, such as arrests or detentions. Furthermore, it penalized cities and counties that implemented sanctuary city policies by withholding funding from them. Consequently, the U.S. government sued Texas over the new law that limits the rights of undocumented immigrants. The federal government claims the law is illegal because it blocks federal law enforcement and breaks the Supremacy Clause, which says federal laws are more important than state laws. In other words, the government says that Texas's law goes against the federal government's right to make and enforce immigration rules. In an unexpected turn of events, in June 2018, the Supreme Court upheld most provisions of the SB 4. However, the court struck out a section that would have penalized officials for refusing to aid federal immigration authorities. Despite the partial rejection, Texas was allowed to enforce the remaining portions of SB 4. Federal authorities have criticized Operation Lone Star, claiming that it employs excessive force and fails to adhere to appropriate procedures for the detention and processing of migrants. Critics assert that Governor Abbott's emphasis on border security is a political strategy to justify scapegoating immigrants and diverting attention from the state's actual problems. However, Governor Abbott has refuted these accusations, claiming that he's acting to safeguard the state's well-being. The Justice Department submitted an official report to the Supreme Court, highlighting the exceptional actions taken by Texas in a standoff that has been characterized as extraordinary. This report provides testimonies from local officials and compelling photographic evidence that demonstrates the extent to which Texas has gone in preventing federal agents from patrolling a 2.5-mile stretch of the U.S.-Mexico border. According to the Justice Department, Texas has mobilized armed National Guardsmen and vehicles to block Border Patrol and federal soldiers from entering a key section of the border. This unprecedented action by Texas signals a significant increase in the state's efforts to hinder the Border Patrol's ability to monitor and secure the border, as well as its capacity to respond to emergencies. Shelby Park has served as a significant point for Border Patrol officers to intercept and handle migrants entering the country illegally. But despite efforts by federal Border Patrol agents, Texas officials have acted decisively to block their entry into state parks, effectively disrupting their operations and sparking concerns over the state's power in relation to the federal authority. According to federal law, the Border Patrol is legally obligated to handle the cases of migrants who are intercepted within U.S. territory. Their responsibilities include evaluating each migrant's situation and determining their proper course of action. This may involve detaining them, transferring them to another agency, deporting them, or releasing them into the country temporarily while they await a court hearing. The border between the United States and Mexico runs through the middle of the Rio Grande River, making this area a crucial location for border security efforts. The takeover of Shelby Park has not been without its share of objections and debates. Mayor Ronaldo Salinas of Eagle Pass clarified that the city did not authorize Texas officials to take control of Shelby Park. He stressed that the city should have requested this move, underscoring the absence of collaboration and communication between state and local authorities. However, the Texas Military Department spokesperson, Michael J. Perry, defended the state's actions in Shelby Park. He said that the measures that have been put in place by the state are to deter illegal border crossings and limit access to organizations involved in facilitating them. The Texas National Guard has consistently been present in Shelby Park carrying out these duties. Under the Biden administration, the Department of Homeland Security created a special task force headed by Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas to tackle the influx of migrants at the Eagle Pass border crossing. This task force aimed to coordinate actions between governmental organizations and find a long-term solution to the border crisis. To tackle the root causes of migration from Central America, the government proposed a $4 billion aid package. This package aimed to address economic and social problems in the region, reducing the reasons why these immigrants feel compelled to abandon their homes and seek better opportunities in the United States. While the aid package received mixed reactions, it sought to alleviate the push factor driving migration. poverty. The Biden administration has committed to a more compassionate and inclusive immigration approach. President Biden highlights the importance of an equitable and just system that prioritizes human dignity and the protection of fundamental rights. The intention is to implement a responsible management of border security while upholding these principles. However, the problem is that none of Biden's administration's initiatives are working. So, driven by unwavering faith, individuals united to organize a convoy aimed at conveying a strong message to the Biden administration: secure the borders. The Supreme Court has upheld the federal government's authority to control border affairs, including the removal of razor wire. Despite this ruling, Texas remains defiant, vowing to hold the line and claiming that the federal government has violated its agreement with the states. As tensions rise, the Take Our Border Back convoy has sparked controversy. The convoy's fundraising campaign on Give, Send, Go has received a boost in donations, indicating supporters' determination to protect their loved ones and oppose what they perceive as evil influences. Concerns have been raised about the convoy's potential to escalate into violence. We understand that many of the people who are opposed to LULAC's efforts have guns, and some of them have extreme and harmful views about immigrants and Hispanics, said Domingo Garcia, the president of LULAC. Congressman Keith Self, a conservative from North Texas, has aligned himself with the trucker convoy. He strongly disagrees with LULAC's characterization of the group, calling it ridiculous hyperbole. He accuses the progressive left of projecting their own actions onto conservatives. According to Keith Self, the trucker convoy provides an opportunity for Latinos to leave the Democratic Party and join the Republican Party. Self says that there is a growing Lexit movement, or Latino exit from the Democratic Party. This group, the largest Latino conservative movement in the nation, plans to make their voices heard as the convoy travels through Virginia and Florida, picking up more supporters along the way. The organizers of the trucker convoy have been promoting the event. They have spread the word from coast to coast, hoping to garner support for their cause.
The sounds of gunfire piercing the night in Nuevo Laredo. Gang members paralyzing traffic with spike strips. Charred tractor trailers lining the highway.
Is the United States federal government going to control our southern border, or are we going to let the Mexican drug cartels do it?
The U.S.-Mexican border crisis has long been a pressing issue for the U.S. government. With each passing day, the tension between the two parties intensifies, painting a grim picture of the realities faced in the region. This never-ending conflict might seem chaotic at times, but behind all of the bloodshed and turmoil lies a complex network of operations orchestrated by some of the most powerful drug cartels, their influence creeping into every nook and cranny along the border. At the center of it all, none other than the Sinaloa cartel, the ruthless gang that was once led by the infamous El Chapo Guzman. But how can this be? Stay tuned as we unravel the layers of this unsettling story.
Well, Mexican drug cartels are not shy about making their presence known along the southern border, to the point where they are turning everyday border towns into all-out war zones.
It's no secret that the Mexican cartels have long used their shared border with the U.S. to their advantage, be it for their smuggling operations or for sheer intimidation. U.S. forces definitely had an uphill battle to uphold in dealing with such ruthless gangs. Cartels wanted to establish control over the border, and they weren't shy about going all the way either, as they were willing to start an armed conflict if need be. But then came a blessing.
The arrest of a Mexican drug lord whose reach was far and wide. He was cruel, unforgiving in his ways, and one of the main destinations for his drug trade, the United States. Tonight, Joaquin Guzman, El Chapo as he's called, seen right here during his reign of terror. And tonight here, this is what he looks like now, captured as the sun came up this morning in a resort where he was staying.
The U.S. regarded El Chapo's arrest and extradition as a significant victory in their fight against the cartels. But who was El Chapo, and why was his capture so crucial? To answer this question, we first need to do a deep dive into his rise to power. Joaquin Archibaldo Guzman, better known as El Chapo, was born on April 4th, 1957, in the rugged mountains of Sinaloa, Mexico. His journey into the world of drug trafficking began in the 1970s when he joined the Guadalajara cartel, led by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. El Chapo quickly proved his worth and effortlessly rose through the ranks of the organization.
It was a group of Mexican drug traffickers saying, okay, let's share our resources.
But he soon became consumed by his newfound passion for absolute power. El Chapo's hunger for control eventually led to a deadly power struggle within the cartel. In 1989, Felix Gallardo's reign came to an unexpected end when he was arrested. That's when El Chapo saw his chance to take control of the cartel, and he gladly took it. He swiftly eliminated his rivals and became the head of the Sinaloa cartel. He ushered in a new set of rules too, a set of rules far more brutal than that of his predecessors. What set him apart was not just his short temper, but also his unparalleled ability to transport drugs into the United States at astonishing speed.
Since 1990, Border Patrol agents have discovered at least 230 cross-border tunnels running from Mexico into California and Arizona. They've seized loads of cocaine, methamphetamines, and marijuana inside them.
That being said, it's no surprise how El Chapo earned the nickname El Rapido. His cartel utilized a vast network of underground tunnels, hidden compartments in vehicles, and even submarines to smuggle drugs across the US-Mexico border. The Sinaloa cartel, named after the Mexican state where it originated, soon became synonymous with power, violence, and unimaginable wealth. El Chapo's cartel quickly gained control over key drug trafficking routes, smuggling never seen before quantities of substances into the United States. Their operations pretty much covered the entire continent.
We've been around here before, shown you some incredibly sophisticated tunnels, but nothing quite like the one we are about to show you. For one thing, it has its own rail network. For another, when the San Diego Joint Tunnel Task Force located it, they also nabbed 8 people and more than 20 tons. That's 20 tons of pot.
The Sinaloa cartel practically invented all of these ingenious smuggling tactics. They were so cunning, in fact, that they managed to evade the authorities for decades. Their reach extended far beyond that of mere illicit smuggling. They also dabbled in extortion, kidnapping, and even political corruption. That didn't come without its challenges, however, and clashes with rival cartels were quite the common occurrence. Nevertheless, El Chapo's strategic mind and his insatiable thirst for violence always seemed to place him a step ahead of his many enemies, thereby making the Sinaloa cartel a force to be reckoned with.
Carlos Rivas says these bullet holes came from huge guns. When the gunfire broke out, my wife's kids had to take cover. They had to hide behind that building.
So what happens when you become the world's most powerful and feared organized crime leader? Well, a couple of things. First, you make it into FBI's most wanted list. And second, everyone is suddenly putting in a lot of effort into bringing you to justice. As public enemy number 1, El Chapo now had a lot on his plate, but he wasn't going to go down without a fight. He became a master of evasion, constantly on the move and changing his appearance to avoid capture. The Mexican government, along with the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, launched multiple operations to try and catch him. But each time, El Chapo managed to slip through their fingers. His ability to outsmart the authorities became the stuff of legend.
A news alert coming out on this one. The infamous El Chapo headed our way. He's now being extradited to the U.S. from Mexico. The drug lord Joaquin Guzman recaptured after 6 months on the run.
But things don't usually end well for cartel leaders. Sooner or later, they're either caught, obliterated, or, worst of all, they get extradited to the United States. Believe it or not, the latter is a fate worse than being shot for people like El Chapo, because it means that they'll never stand a chance of ever evading justice again. When kingpins get caught, they more often than not get sent to prisons in their own country. That's exactly what they want too, because it means they can rely on their powerful influence to get out almost as fast as they got in the first place. They can always bribe the authorities, rely on corrupt politicians, or, if all else fails, they can simply plan and execute the old-fashioned escape. And that's exactly what El Chapo did. Using his powerful connections and wits, he managed to escape not once, but 2 different times. In the early 2000s, the world witnessed one of the most audacious prison breaks in history. El Chapo had been locked up at Mexico's Puente Grande maximum security prison since 1995, following his involvement in a brutal shootout at the Guadalajara airport in 1993 that earned him a life sentence. But El Chapo had other plans. Puente Grande prison was considered to be a relatively secure place to keep a high-profile man like El Chapo. But things weren't really so black and white. Thanks to a man named Damaso Lopez Nunez, the deputy director of security, El Chapo enjoyed certain comforts during his time at Puente Grande. His wealth and influence allowed him to live a relatively luxurious life within the prison walls, with access to good food, women, and even volleyball. His cell became his sanctuary, a place where he could plan his next move. His cozy life took a hit when Damaso departed Puente Grande amidst corruption suspicions. Suddenly, El Chapo found himself feeling vulnerable, facing his worst fear: the Mexican Supreme Court's decision allowing the extradition of Mexican prisoners, including El Chapo, to the United States. So, on January 19, 2001, El Chapo decided to make his move. Things become relatively unclear from this point on, with some believing that he was smuggled out in a laundry cart, while others arguing that he simply walked out the door. Whichever theory you might believe, El Chapo's daring escape meant that he could continue his vicious dealings for another decade.
The capture of the man some call Mexico's Osama bin Laden, one of the most wanted criminals in the world and the top illegal drug dealer in the U.S., drug lord Joaquin Guzman, known as El Chapo or Shorty, became notorious for his global empire, his ruthless reputation, and his legendary ability to elude police. That is until this weekend.
He was caught yet again in February 2014 at a beach resort in Mexico. This time, he was sent to an even more impenetrable prison, the Altiplano Federal Prison, located in Almoloya de Juarez. The Mexican government was convinced that El Chapo had no way of escaping this time around. Unfortunately for them, not even this state-of-the-art fortress was able to restrain El Chapo's resourcefulness. While prison personnel were keeping a close eye on El Chapo, making sure that he never sees the light of day again, a team of highly skilled engineers and cartel members were tirelessly digging an elaborate escape tunnel right beneath their feet. The tunnel was a marvel of ingenuity. It even had ventilation systems to make the whole process more bearable. The entire process likely took months to complete, and it involved countless collaborators that only had one goal in mind: to free their beloved boss.
His arrest last year was heralded worldwide. He has now escaped from prison for a second time. Late last night, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman broke out of a maximum security prison about 60 miles from Mexico City.
Late into the night of July 11, 2015, he crawled through the tunnel that was dug for him and rejoiced in his newfound freedom. It wasn't until the early hours of that same day that the guards discovered his absence. The authorities were left feeling powerless and humiliated once again. This last unbelievable stint is what made the Mexican government realize that things weren't going to change in their favor unless they amped up their efforts significantly. They knew that El Chapo was on the run again, and they knew that they simply didn't have the means necessary to actually keep him locked up. Their best bet was to try and catch him one final time and place him into a U.S. prison cell as soon as possible. Their final shot at apprehending him came just 6 months later. On January 8, 2016, Mexican Marines raided a safe house in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, where El Chapo was hiding. A fierce gun battle ensued, but El Chapo was finally caught.
The moment he learned where authorities were taking him, that was the moment he was actually brought here to the U.S. to face justice.
The world's most wanted narco looked confused, overwhelmed even, asking the DEA agent, "Where am I?" "Nueva York," they told him. His face says it all.
Putting El Chapo behind American bars was definitely a smart move. Isolated and carefully monitored, there was no way of him getting out this time, and he was forced to finally deal with the consequences of his terrible actions. But is the world a safer place because of his arrest? Sadly, it isn't. In fact, things just got so much worse. Violence at the US-Mexico border has escalated tremendously since then. You might be wondering, how is this even possible? How can the arrest of the most feared and brutal cartel kingpin barely scratch the surface of the crime in the region? Well, to understand this, we need to take a look at the events that are currently unfolding at the border.
I will say it again and again. If we do not focus on these cartels, get ready. Get ready. If we continue to attack the symptoms of everything you've not talked about, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, money laundering, this adjustment from smuggling to the trafficking of people, domestically, yes, we have to challenge that. But if you don't go after who the problem is, which is these cartels, and crush their labs, you're just seeing the beginning.
How did the US-Mexican border crisis start, and why didn't it end by now? This ongoing issue didn't just pop up overnight. It's deeply rooted in a complex history of political, economic, and social factors shaping the relationship between the neighboring countries. The US-Mexico border is nearly 2,000 miles long, with much of the land having an existing border wall, but it wasn't always that way. The first barrier between the countries was built in the early 1900s and was only there to deter cattle from crossing over. Fast forward to today, and the high walls that have since been built are meant to block people instead.
This makeshift encampment behind me can be a lifeline for migrants crossing this treacherous terrain here along the Arizona border. You can see migrants behind me getting food, water, and basic necessities here before being transferred over to Border Patrol agents.
When the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA for short, was inaugurated in the 1990s, its goal was to achieve better collaboration between the US, Mexico, and Canada. The agreement was quite successful, but it also attracted some less favorable, unforeseen consequences. People who lived in close proximity to the borders complained that they were being pushed out of the agricultural game by the US, which led to them seeking better opportunities within the United States. Then came the 2000s, when the states pushed for stricter laws against immigration. A ton of new security measures were then quickly taken at the border. They included surveillance cameras, physical barriers, and even more Border Patrol agents. Meanwhile, local cartels were getting increasingly more volatile as they realized that they would have to work overtime in order to make sure that their products could still seep through the cracks of this new system.
Hiding drugs inside these gas tanks so that the customs people have to cut it open with a blowtorch.
This led to a horrific spike in violence in the region, which in turn led to even more people trying to flee the dangerous grounds they found themselves in. As this never-ending cycle continued, the number of people seeking asylum grew at an accelerated pace, and to make matters worse, the process through which they could get in was extremely time-consuming and complex. People were stuck. The authorities had no foolproof way of dealing with the situation, and cartel activity was running rampant.
Like many people in Juarez, Maria Torres cries at all the suffering. She lost 4 children in 5 years, 1 strangled, 2 shot, 1 overdose.
Near El Paso, Texas. It's not just desperate families turning themselves into the Border Patrol, but adult men running away from the agents.
Since then, every elected head of state has had their own strategies in dealing with the region, with a notable example being former President Trump's zero-tolerance policy that caused the displacement of numerous families fleeing Mexico. Keep in mind that several of the asylum seekers were just kids who were in serious danger of losing their lives on their way there, and even more so if they were forced to turn around and go back home.
No one with these children dumped out on the side of the river here on our farm.
Daniel made the 5,000-kilometer trip with his 2 young cousins to escape gang violence and poverty back home.
Sadly, as the crisis progressed, so did the drug cartels in seizing what they saw as a valuable opportunity. All of the chaos surrounding the border served as the perfect decoy that would allow them to get their product into the United States unbothered. This led to an even bigger crisis that extended way beyond the border walls and armed guards. People in the US were losing their lives to addiction at a scary, unprecedented pace. The culprit? A new, devastating drug called fentanyl. This is where the Sinaloa cartel comes in yet again. Even with El Chapo now being behind bars, likely for the rest of his life, the Sinaloa cartel is far from being a distant memory. With El Chapo out of the picture, the cartel went through a change of structure and re-emerged under a new command. Enter Ismael Mario Zambada Garcia, or El Mayo, as he's now known around the world. A long-standing member of the Sinaloa cartel, trusted by Chapo and feared by everyone else. He, along with El Chapo's remaining sons, are now running the operations, and, by the looks of it, they're not planning on stopping anytime soon.
Mexico is experiencing a sharp rise in violence. Some of the most notable examples in recent weeks include a series of roadside bombs in the state of Jalisco that left 4 police officers dead.
The amount of fentanyl that has been getting in is at an all-time high, while overall drug busts are on a downward slide. El Mayo and his gang have been incredibly successful in their smuggling operations by using some of the same tricks their former leader once employed. They're not taking things for granted either, as they remain extremely elusive, with authorities barely being able to make a dent in their enterprise so far. So, now that we know how the Sinaloa cartel managed to stay alive and, unfortunately, even thrive, in spite of all the efforts made by both the US and the Mexican governments to have them dismantled and destroyed, what is there to do? Strange as it may sound, it seems like none other than El Chapo himself could be the missing link needed to solve this entire ordeal. As his extensive trial unraveled, a number of important revelations came out that shook everyone involved in this crisis to their very core. Let's take a look at what went on after his capture. El Chapo was sent to ADX Florence in Colorado, also known as the most secure Supermax prison in the US, where he is currently serving life in prison. He is under strict supervision and is locked away, alone, for 23 hours per day, just like every other inmate. Moving on to the inner workings of his trial, shocking information about how El Chapo and his cartel operated started coming to life. As it turns out, not only was the entire operation a lot more elaborate than what the authorities initially thought, but the degree to which the Sinaloa cartel managed to find and exploit every weakness in the border was astounding. The first jaw-dropping moment, the extensive network of tunnels used by El Chapo's cartel to ferry drugs across the border.
6 people are under arrest tonight after U.S. authorities discovered a drug tunnel between San Diego and Tijuana. The tunnel, the length of 6 football fields and 6 stories below ground, has rail tracks, ventilation, and electricity. Law enforcement seized more than 1,700 pounds of cocaine. As the U.S. attorney said, there's no more light at the end of this narco tunnel.
These secret pathways were like a hidden highway for the cartel. This enabled the cartel to shuffle massive amounts of product completely undetected. With no obstacles in sight, they were free to move around and do whatever they pleased. There was no way the authorities would ever be able to close down every single such tunnel. Their plan was almost perfect. But the tunnels were just the tip of this massive iceberg. The trial also uncovered their ingenious smuggling tactics. They were sneaking drugs through the US by hiding them in shipments that came through the legal route. Trucks upon trucks of cooking oil or vegetables were riddled with hidden stacks of various substances. They even hid them in the truck's tires. But that's not all. US ports were also being flooded with smuggled goods by means of container ships. Similarly to the tactics they employed by land, they would use ships that already had permission to dock in the US ports. But the most shocking revelation from the trial came to light when El Chapo revealed that corruption was present down to the very core of the very government that publicly swore to bring an end to the crisis. But behind closed doors, billion-dollar deals were being made. Unbeknownst to the general public, El Chapo wouldn't have been able to build up his vicious empire without making some friends along the way. So he went as far as to establish powerful connections with fellow Colombian cartels, as well as, more surprisingly, a lot of high-ranking officials within the Mexican government.
Mexico's former top cop is behind bars. The attention turns to the man who got away, a case that further proves corruption can rise all the way to the top. Genaro Garcia Luna was convicted of taking massive bribes to protect drug cartels he was supposed to be taking down.
These priceless bits of information are of great significance for U.S. authorities who are currently fighting the good fight. If they get better at understanding how the Sinaloa cartel conducts its shady business, then they will have a greater shot at eventually shutting them down for good. Hopefully, that happens sooner rather than later, because for now, they're still sitting at the very top of the organized crime food chain. As for El Chapo, life in a U.S. prison is a far cry from the life he's been previously accustomed to. At one point, he even wrote a letter to a U.S. judge explaining that he's being treated unfairly due to his previous prison escapes. In another letter, this time addressed to the President of Mexico, he pleaded to be relocated to a jail in his home country. This is not a decision that Mexico's President, López Obrador, can take lightly. High-profile cases such as El Chapo are bound to be examined, looked at, and analyzed. The way he's handled will most likely become the norm for other prisoners of similar importance. Besides, El Chapo's experience in escaping prison is no laughing matter, and authorities are convinced that, if given the opportunity, he will definitely try to do it again. Do you think El Chapo will try and make a run for it again? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to let us know in the comments below. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed our video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to see more videos like this, feel free to hit that subscribe button to make sure you never miss one again. Until next time, stay safe.